The next stitch we're going to be doing is the cross stitch. Now, the cross stitch is also done on a raw edge. Edges are not folded in. This is a raw edge. Wherever this stitch is done on a jacket, it's on a raw edge. And the purpose of having a raw edge as opposed to a turned in edge, and this is what is called a turn in edge, because you've got this edge turned in and you can do your felling stitch on that. But the raw edge gives you a much flatter edge, a flatter seam, so that when it's folded back and pressed, you don't get the ridge of a folded seam. The raw edge is less likely to show. Bottoms of trousers is usually a raw edge, sometimes overlocked or serged, but the serging has to be on a very, very thin thread. Now your next stitch is a cross stitch. This is one of the few stitches, probably the only stitches done from left to right if you're a right-hander. Of course, if you're a left-hander, it's done from right to left. Being right-handed, it started on the left and you complete the stitch as you approach the right side. Now, you hide the end of the thread underneath. And the same idea of this stitch, but the difference on this stitch is sometimes called a raw edge cross stitch, or a raw edge felling stitch is a little different. But whereas here you've got the edge here standing out, which is the preferred stitch for me on the bottoms of jackets and cuffs and so on, because by having this raw edge here, and when I press, there's less chance of having an impression coming through. The cross stitch is actually used in the same areas, but many more parts of a jacket or a waistcoat. And this is going to be a 5mm or a 1/4 inch cross stitch. And the idea of a close stitch such as this is that because we're just about picking up a yarn or two on the actual cloth that we're working on, but let's call this like the outside of the cloth as opposed to the inlay side of the cloth, which is on the inside. The idea of picking up a yarn or two is the same as that we've done on the blind stitch, is that you don't have the actual stitch thread coming through. There's a bit of tension there at the moment because it's the needle that's pulling, but very, very little. And a 5mm or 1/4 inch stitch means that you're advancing a 1/4 inch and you're taking a 1/4 inch also on the length. So the length and the width is of a similar amount. Now if you lift with your finger underneath, if you lift and work from right to left, you'll find it's a lot easier to pick up just one yarn, or even 2 yarns at a maximum. There I'm picking up just 2 yarns. You can barely see the needle there. But if I went just a little bit deeper, you see what the consequences are. With that knot, let me go just a little deeper. You're seeing much more of an impression. I can actually see the needle, the shiny needle coming through there, just by taking up an extra yarn. So picked up there, you can see approximately 4 yarns. What I really want to do here is to be picking up 1 or 2 yarns, so the thread won't show. And naturally, I expect there would be the occasion that you might be a little bit deeper with your stitch. Make sure that if you do go deeper, that you don't pull your stitch tight. So the tension on your stitch is very important. That stitch should just be resting there and not pulled at all. So as I sew here, just letting that stitch rest. So there's a tiny amount of leeway on that thread. And of course, it's a cross stitch because of the action, right over left, it's actually crossing over. This stitch is sometimes done even smaller than this. It depends on where you're sewing. If it was at the bottom of trousers, for instance, I'd always recommend 5mm or less, because in wearing trousers, the toes can get caught onto the bottom of the trousers. And if it's not sewn properly, there's every chance that the bottom is going to rip apart. And with bespoke tailoring, you avoid that the bottom of the trousers ripping apart. I'm just checking at the back to make sure my thread's not showing. And I would welcome you to do the same. There are the odd occasions that you might go a little bit deeper. Of course, if you're sewing with matching thread on a garment you're making, then you have a certain amount of license to make very slight errors, because of course matching thread won't show. But what you got to be mindful of is that the impressions do not show on the outside, and the impressions will show if your stitches are too tight. So you're just simply resting there, and you'll find, I wouldn't say that it's loose, but you'll find if the stitch is marginally looser than being tight, it's actually a stronger stitch, because a tight stitch will be pulling on the yarns and very likely break through the yarn, because the thread you're sewing on is actually stronger than the couple of yarns that you're sewing onto. Now, in the process of making a waistcoat or a jacket, I shall be describing how long your cross stitch should be, because there are some areas that cross stitch is a centimeter apart, centimeter in width, centimeter in length. As my thread is finished and I'm actually joining in between the previous stitch. So this overlaps and shows that there is strength. This overlap ensures that there's strength and continuity. Still working a quarter, but what I'm going to do now is a slightly smaller stitch that you would often have at the bottoms of trousers. And incidentally, the needle that you should be using is a shorter needle. It's called a betweens, John James betweens, size 5005, betweens 005. The reference number on this needle is L4311. So you get close to your previous stitch, less than half a centimeter, and of course less than half a centimeter apart. I would say approximately 3 millimeters or 3/16 of an inch. Handcraft tailoring is somewhat labor intensive, it's slow. Just regard it as being therapeutic and as being creative. It's like an oil painter creating a beautiful piece of artwork. So the artist does not bother about how long it takes him to complete a piece. It's finished when it's finished. Just about 4 more stitches to complete. And actually, just to finish off the corner, I'll do a felling stitch. I'll show you many more felling stitches later. I'm not ready to show you that felling stitch formally yet. But I'll make a point here in felling this corner, which is raised corner, is that when you're felling, ensure that just let me tack that here. Just ensure that you show less of the thread. The advancement of your stitch is in between the layers of cloth. So you advance the thread or the needle in between the layers of cloth. And when you tuck the needle in, you tuck it straight from where you've pulled it out before and advance in between. And you basically show less of the thread at the felling stitch. So here is a turned in edge felling stitch as opposed to a raw edge felling stitch. More often than not, where the edges are turned in, you've got it doubled. The cloth is doubled here. And as the cloth is doubled here, there's less risk of it pulling and tearing out from the stitch, because it's quite a strong stitch. In fact, it's one of the strongest finishing stitches. So we advance in between. Now and again, when the thread knots up, you just pull it, tuck the needle in between, just give it some tension and it'll loosen out. And to complete, you tuck the thread on the inside approximately a centimeter away and cut. And so you've got a little bit of felling stitch here. You could see at the side where, just about where the stitch is done, but nothing on the outside. And of course here again, where the cross stitch is done, you can't see any of the threads coming on the outside.